At number 10, we have got the Allosaurus, and I have a very good reason for this. In my opinion, you need it because although the Rex is a great boss creature, I think you should try out the Allosaurus. There are some good reasons on why this creature is sort of better than the Rex for bosses, or maybe it doesn't have the health and the general appeal to the extent that the Rex does. It deals bleed damage, which the Rex doesn't, and most notably it has the pack buff, which the Rex also doesn't. Compared to the Rex as well, it is much more mobile, which makes this thing an insanely nice creature to use compared to the Rex. If you've ever used a Rex in Ark, you know how horrible they are to control and just how they go all over the place if you get them to follow you. In the tech cave, I usually go with a few allos in there, as you know, they sort of get around a bit more, and even if some of the Rexes do die, I have some of that allo support. But you could even go in full out, and I've done it before, going for the Overseer with just allos, and it will work perfectly fine. They are great boss creatures and great generally around as carnivores. They have the pack buff, they deal bleed damage, so it's really worth getting one if you do not have one yet. Coming up next, we have got the Mantis, and this is a creature, is sort of a jack of all trades, if you will. This thing can pretty much do anything. Attack for you, mine for you, climb for you to some extent. It's reasonably mobile at getting round. Obviously, it can't climb walls or anything, but it can wield any melee weapon that you can give it. Apart from tech weapons, it cannot wield those. Obviously, ranged weapons, I'm pretty sure don't work, and in fact, they do not work either. But things like pickaxes, hatchets, swords, pikes, things like that, they're all going to work really nicely with the Mantis. Do take into mind the durability does drop a lot faster though, instead of when you use it, but you get 2 of them and you can get a lot done, and it is a heck of a lot of fun. Chopping out overseers with those swords is a great way to get mutton, and even mining metal using picks as well is enough that you might not even consider getting an Anki. While I'd still recommend an Anki, I do think you can get around using the Mantis as well with no trouble whatsoever, unless metal is your #1 priority and all you need in the world is metal. That applies probably more to PvP players than PvE players. Going up next, we have got the Spino, and I'm putting this thing here because it is great for the underwater caves on the island especially, which is a really nice use, and for bosses as well. Slightly preferable to the allo with the whole health aspect of things, and it can also be good for the moder as well. There is no boss fight really where I wouldn't consider the Spino to some extent. Probably wouldn't bring it to the Manticore, but you don't really get Spinos on Scorched Earth, so you know. But if you did bring one over, it would still be very easily possible. The Spino, again, like the Mantis, is a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to combat. It can do everything combat. It can turn 180 on the spot, stand on its hind legs and deal even more damage. It's got the hydration buff, which is a really nice one if you want to pack a punch if you're in the water or even touching the water. Great for the Moda boss fight, by the way. And they don't just get stuck everywhere like the Rex. I really will keep hammering this on throughout the video with some other creatures, because the Rex is just a horrible creature to use in terms of mobility. While it can attack, it's only really good from the front. If something gets stuck behind it and it can't really get round, it's sort of done for. Whereas the Spino has the mobility and also the health, which the Allo doesn't quite have, but they're pretty much on the same level. I would put the Spino a little bit higher though, as it is my preference. In number 7, we've got the Snow Owl, and this really does have to be a top pick for me. When you think about it, it is great for healing up creatures. Some may prefer the Daedon, that is totally fine, but for me it is Snow Owl all the way, unless you're in a boss fight, although it's not the most crucial creature in that initial fighting. The Snow Owl has a lot more abilities than just healing them. We will get onto that a little bit later, but it is a phenomenal glider and travel mount. Sort of preferable to the RG in my opinion, although I will give an honorable mention here, as you know, it is a great creature which if you don't have it, you should get one, unless you're on AB or Gen 1, obviously, because you can't use flyers there. But they have that same dive bomb sort of ability as the Griffin. They can't damage with it like the Griffin, but they still have it. It feels smoother and a little bit more articulate to me, in my opinion, compared to the Griffin's dive bomb ability. Don't really know what that says, but I sort of prefer the feel of this creature. And you've got that sort of night vision heat-seeking mode. You can find any creature you want, and players, if you're a PvP person out there, if someone's trying to ride your base, you can easily see. Sort of acts as a little bit of night vision as well. Leveling up their stamina will allow you to heal more, and you can even heal wild creatures, which you can't do on the Daedon, and it's one thing which maybe you wouldn't think about, but when you think about it, it is extremely useful. If you're taming something, you're whacking loads of tranks into it, and its health is really low, you need to heal it up, right? Or you need to let it heal. And letting it heal takes ages, so you might as well just heal it up. The Snow Owl, it really comes in useful, and the Owl Pellets are great with Gatchas as well. So they're great creatures, and they work really nicely with others too. Now we've got the Rhyniognatha, and my opinion has grown on this creature as time goes on, but it really can do a lot, from picking up loads and loads of hot creatures, even up to the size of a Rex, you know, Parasauritheriums, all of that. There is a lot you can do with this creature for general transport. Also, if you let it pick up a vault, you can just put loads of stuff in there and transport loads of things around the map without really having to worry about the weight, and it is extremely useful for things like that, and I would highly recommend the use. Great for PvP as well, although possibly a little bit unpopular these days as it is a little overused, and the Pyromane's sort of taken over to my distaste, but I'm not an ASA player, so I will leave that out of this list entirely. My least favorite Ark creature, if you know, because you have to pay for it, and I am not willing to do that whatsoever. Rhyniognatha's are reasonably rare, which is their only real downside, and they sort of did rip off the tame method from the Reaper. But if you don't have one yet, and you have the island, which everyone does if you play an Ark, get yourself a Rhyniognatha. They're not too difficult to tame, but you will just need the right preparation for it, but you should be fine. In number 5, we have got the Thyla, and this is sort of a must-have for me to some extent. The creature at number 3 is slightly preferable, but if you have the island, again, get yourself a Thyla. They are insanely useful for traveling and transporting around the map. It is a great one to have, and if you do not have one, I would strongly recommend getting yourself one. There is no trouble or no problem whatsoever in getting yourself a Thyla. If you have a reasonable trap and you look out when you go into the redwoods, you should have no troubles taming one. They aren't too difficult if you prepare for it, and they are great at running around the map, climbing around, so they deal bleed damage. Sadly, they aren't allowed into bosses, but for everything else, they really do work very nicely as general tames to have, and they're great for any sort of transport needs that you could possibly want on land in Ark. So they are great if you've never got one, or you've never tamed one before. If you don't have one at the moment, pick up yourself a Thyla at the earliest opportunity. The Yuty is one of those where you really can't compromise with it. It is an insanely great creature for bosses with that ability, which we all just absolutely love, which is the fact that you can buff your own creatures while debuffing the enemy as well. And I don't mean the fear roll from that. Obviously, the courage will give you 25% damage boost with 25% damage reduction, which is just really nice, and damage reduction for, you know, the things dealing damage to you, of course. On top of that, they're pretty decent at dealing damage and going around the map with. You should have no real troubles or issues using one of these things around the map. They work quite nicely in the place of what you use a Rex for, apart from in boss fights, and you can even just use Yuties in boss fights if you want. A bit of an unpopular opinion, and I'm not sure many people do it, but it does definitely work. They are versatile, nice, easy to use, just great carnivores, and that ability is fantastic. The Fear Roar doesn't really work in boss fights so much, as, you know, the bosses aren't affected by the Fear Roar, but still, for some other creatures that are small and getting in the way, especially players trying to raid your bases on Pteranodons, for you PvP players out there, the Fear Roar can become incredibly useful. The Shadowmane is in at number 3, and it really does have to be one of those where if you have a Shadowmane, you don't really necessarily need a Thyla, and although it does not deal the bleed ability, it has the hydration buff and is great underwater, which the Shadowmane, the Thyla, sorry, of course isn't. It also has a little bit more mobility than the Thyla, being able to jump incredible distances, which simply would not be possible on a Thyla, and they can charge their damage up over time and deal even more. On top of that, when a male and female are present, it can go invisible, which is just a nice extra ability to have. They are truly great beasts of doing boss fights as well, because they are allowed in bosses. Although they have been nerfed since release, which was a little while back, they are still great creatures to this day, and I love the Shadowmane to death. Apart from the really annoying taming methods, you should get one of these things, so prepare for an absolute headache taming one, and then once you've got one, you're going to absolutely love these things. They've even got natural armor as well, which is much better than them not having a saddle and not having natural armor, because they don't have a saddle, but they do have natural armor. And number 2 is the Maywing. This is probably the easiest tame on the list. The saddle is unlocked at level 19, and it is the king of all things traveling. Well, not a flyer, it is a glider which can cover incredible distances with little time whatsoever. It's also great as a portable feeding trough as well, with those realistic milk animations, which are still disturbing to me to this day, but still, nevertheless, it is a great creature for all that it offers. It is insane that you can have a creature of this caliber at such an early level and with such an easy tame method. A simple knockout and you can just use some signs to trap it in place, or you can use a net gun if you want to be a little bit more proficient, but the sign method works fine and you can get those much before you get the net gun, and it is much cheaper. As you can see, these things just go so fast, and on top of all of this, they can gather berries as well, which is a nice little extra, and sort of at the moment they are my main berry gatherer, because when I go out it's really nice, easy and convenient to get berries with these things. Now, you must know me by now. In at number 1 is the Rhyniognatha. For me, this creature tops any other which you could possibly need. It is great in boss fights and can even deal bleed damage to boss fights, which creatures like the Allo simply can't, and it can latch onto them and do all kinds of things. It has the pack buff too, which is a lovely buff, especially in a boss fight, because you're definitely going to have more than 3 of these things. And here's that bleed damage in action. It is insane at what these things can do. They take no fall damage too, which is a really nice bonus for these creatures to have, and I truly love them for it. It's convenient when traveling around, as you don't have to worry about taking said fall damage. They're also pretty speedy creatures on top of all of that, and they have a little glide as they fall too, so they don't just fall incredibly quickly, which is the reason why they don't take fall damage, of course, but it's nice that all of that is included. But yeah, incredibly fast, zippy creatures. They can even do all kinds of parkour, and obviously the Thyla can climb up trees and vertical surfaces and walls and whatever, but so can the Rhyniognatha, and I love how it does all of that, and it is truly great for all that it offers. I cannot hammer it enough that the Rhyniognatha is like my favorite art creature. If you do not have a Rhyniognatha, get yourself a Rhyniognatha. They are so good for general travel, getting around, and most importantly, boss fights, which sort of are the most important things in Ark, as it is what you need to do to complete the game. But if you've never got yourself a Rhyniognatha, get yourself one, because you really do need. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.